This is our top tips for Quilt-as-you-go, as well as any kind of sewing in general. Welcome back to Pattern Pool TV. If you're new here, I'm Monica and this is my daughter Laura, and we make videos about how we make our Quilt-as-you-go quilt.
So this is our top tips for Quilt-as-you-go and other sewing in general video, as told by all of you. A few weeks ago we did a Facebook post and we asked what were your top tips for Quilt-as-you-go that you've learned so far. So we're compiling a lot of the tips from all of our videos, and this is our 70th YouTube video.
It is 70th. Hey, high five me on that.
Woo! Did we just go woo at the same time?
I think we did.
Okay, let's jump in. So the first tip is that you can actually make your own Quilt-as-you-go quilts.
That's right. So when we asked everybody in the Facebook group what their tips were, it was like, the tip was, I can make a Quilt-as-you-go quilt. And you can. With our videos, we show different ways to do Quilt-as-you-go or how you join quilted sections together. So my best advice is to watch the video, which is how to design and plan your own Quilt-as-you-go quilt. We give a rundown of 5 different methods, and a 6th method is the first section of this quilt behind me here. And it's all about working out which method suits you. And it's just so good for people with small sewing machines or small spaces. And it's quite amazing to see the things that people are making. And just by the way, so behind us is our quilt, which is called our Island Home Mystery Quilt. And this is a sampler quilt that we're making using 7 different Quilt-as-you-go methods. And the videos are free for everyone to enjoy. It's our latest course, and if you'd like to join along, all you have to do is just head to our website and you can purchase the course notes, and you can also join our Facebook group too. Which brings us on to the next tip.
So the next tip was that a lot of comments, people were saying that they really appreciate our Facebook group as a resource for Quilt-as-you-go, which is like, thank you so much. We actually created that group on a whim one day where I was just like, Mom, we need a Facebook group.
That's right. I know.
And so, if you are on Facebook, feel free to join, because lots of people posting their quilts all the time, right?
That's exactly right. And it's really amazing to see what people are actually doing with the methods that they've learned from our channel. And it really is quite amazing. We've got some really talented people. We've got beginners. We've got people that are sharing their first quilt they've ever made. And
it's exciting. I love looking at it.
It is exciting, and we're really proud. It's a very friendly, supportive group. So in the group, basically share pictures of Quilt-as-you-go quilts that you've made using the techniques you've been inspired by from our YouTube channel, and you can join in with the discussions and you can ask the group for advice, and it's just a great way to connect with like-minded people from all over the world.
I think it's really special, and we try and put in a lot of effort to monitor that group so no scammers come in.
That's right.
So if you do want to join, please answer the questions so we know you're real.
So you're not a robot.
Yeah, exactly.
No robots allowed.
Exactly. And so that brings me on to my 3rd tip. And so this one is about the backing fabric, and the tip is to use non-directional backing fabric.
That's right, that way. Because when you go to join all of your quilted sections together, you don't have to worry about making sure that some pieces facing a certain way up so that your backing fabric is all facing the same way. So just an all over small to medium kind of busy print, and that's going to pretty much hide where the joins are, and it will hide any minor tension problems, and it just looks really nice. I think it looks a lot neater than using a plain or solid backing fabric.
And that just leads me to another tip that I just thought of.
Wow.
Try and, if possible, just use scraps, and then you make a reversible Quilt-as-you-go quilt.
Oh yeah, that's right. That is one of the great things about Quilt-as-you-go is that you can use up different fabrics on the back. It's a great way to use
it. It's like a 2-for-1 quilt if you're making it as a gift.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, exactly.
Our next tip is about the batting. So that tip is to use a low loft cotton batting. And so we could probably make a whole video about batting, but Mum's going to do the rundown.
I'm going to make it really quick. Okay, so cotton or bamboo, try to choose a natural fibre. You'll find that your natural fibres tend to just grip onto your cotton fabric, and you really don't need to use any basting spray. You can just use a couple of safety pins, and it's good because you're not using any glue or anything like that. Now, batting is a thin material. It's a non-woven material that all the fibres are needle punched onto, and that holds the batting nice and stable. And it just means that it gives it more strength. A really great advantage of that is that your quilting lines can actually be further apart, so they can actually be up to 8 inches apart, and the scrim holds it all together. So a lot of times when you get a batting, it's an 80% cotton, 20% polyester, so the 20% is actually the scrim. And I was doing some research on it this morning, and I do believe that there are some battings coming out that actually have a cotton scrim, so it's going to be like 100% cotton. But we need to do a video all about batting because there's a lot on that.
Yeah.
Avoid using polyester batting because with Quilt-as-you-go you're doing a lot of ironing, and you will flatten the seam too much. Like polyester will just flatten down. And with any batting, just really avoid the iron touching the batting, because just in case it does touch a polyester scrim, you just don't want the batting to be affected by the heat of the iron. So one other question we get a lot is, does the scrim face up or scrim face down? This morning I went onto the Warm and Natural website, and the question was, does the batting have a right and wrong side? And it actually said no, but then it said, but it does have a scrim. And they do recommend that the scrim is on the underneath of the quilt. And the reason for that is that all of the fibres are needle punched onto that scrim from the top down. So they say that if your quilting is going in the same direction as the needle punching, that it's going to sew easier. Now, having said that, I'm a bit of a rule breaker. I have put my scrim facing up at times, and I haven't had a problem. It's sewn beautifully, and I'm sure that there have been millions of quilts that have been made with the scrim facing the wrong way before anyone was even thinking about what a scrim is. Yeah, that's right.
Probably. Yeah.
One more thing about a scrim, it gives your batting, it has more of a fabric kind of feel to it. So to me, it's easier to cut out, and your pieces tend to stay in shape more than a batting without a scrim.
Gosh, it's a full thing, isn't it?
It is. So we will do a full video on batting, but I hope that little bit helped you. But really the most important thing is, don't use a polyester because it's going to flatten under the iron. Yeah.
But I think that when it comes to batting, and if you're a beginner, shop local, ask your quilting community what they do.
Yeah.
Post it in our Facebook group. There's a lot of people who are like, I'm buying online from this location, this location.
Yep.
And so, yeah, really, it's all just about like word of mouth. About.
It is.
So tip number 5.
Okay, so if you're going to use spray starch the fabric before you cut your pieces out. And the reason for this is that if you haven't washed your fabric, so washing is a personal choice. We talk about that in the Facebook group too. But say for instance, if you haven't washed your fabric, and even if you have washed your fabric and you cut all your pieces out perfectly, and you've got say some 3-inch squares, and then you spray starch on it, it can shrink it just a fraction, so it's not going to be that perfect size ready for piecing together. And spray starch is a personal choice. A lot of people absolutely love using it. I use it for certain things. I don't use it that much, but that's just because I'm experienced with handling fabric. So but if you want to try it, it does make your fabric beautiful and stiff and ready to sew.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. And then tip number 6 is use a scant 1/4-inch seam allowance.
That's exactly right. So we have a video on this.
And a blog post.
And a blog post, yes. And we had a laugh about this before because in a lot of patterns it will say use a scant 1/4-inch seam allowance. And what measurement is a scant? Like, you can't even work that out. So in the blog post, I kind of, had a little bit of fun trying to work out the actual math of a scant, but it's basically a fraction less than 1/4 of an inch. And the reason for this is that when you sew your seam, so in this video, we did an example of sew 3.5-inch strips together. They don't have to be very long. And then press your seams in, press them out, but measure that center strip. And often you'll find that it's too small. And the reason for that is that when you press your seam, there's fabric that's taken up in the fold of the seam, and also your thread takes up a little bit of fabric too. So all of that takes up real estate in that strip of fabric, which should actually end up being 1 inch wide, but it only ends up being, a little bit less. So in the video, we showed some tips on how to adjust your seam so that it's just going to be a scant 1/4-inch seam allowance. Check it out. A lot of people in the group said that was actually the top tip that they absolutely love. So now when they make patchwork blocks, they come out the size that they should.
Yep.
And I just want to say one more thing, and it's really important. Don't go moving your needle position over if the needle is not going to fit in, you know, the hole of the foot. I don't want anyone breaking their needle.
Yeah.
But it is a really good tip. But you have to watch the video. So we'll put the link for that.
We'll put the link below and the link to the blog post, because when you're talking about scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, I think there was some confusion as to where to use it. So just to clarify, that's for when you're piecing for Quilt-as-you-go.
Piecing, that's
And what
exactly
about when
right.
you're doing like stitch and flip? So we did a series of stitch and flip blocks last year.
Yeah.
So if you're stitching and flipping as
definitely.
well. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep, piecing.
Wow.
Yep, so patchwork blocks and stitch and flip blocks is where you use your scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Yeah.
So number 7 is use a leader and ender to prevent your fabric from being chewed into the hole when you start sewing.
That's right. And
why is that?
And
you
why
actually
is that?
Googled, you found that out, right?
Well, I didn't Google it. I worked it out myself one day. I was just like, how come when I first started sewing on my mum's old Singer sewing machine, how come I didn't have to worry about the fabric getting chewed down when you very first start sewing? And the reason for that is that sewing machines in the old days, they only did straight stitching. So the plate where the needle goes down into the bobbin, it just has one hole. So there's not a lot of space for your fabric to get chewed down when you start to sew. But now our sewing machines in the plate have an oval shape, and that's so that the needle can go from side to side to do zigzag and decorative stitches. So sometimes some sewing machines do decorative stitches that are up to 9 millimeters wide.
Oh wow.
That's right, that's like 3/8 of an inch.
Yeah.
And so there's
a lot of space.
There's a lot of space. So when you start sewing, for the needle to go down and the fabric to kind of go along with it. So that's why we use the leader and ender. And I think we forgot to mention with these tips, a lot of these tips have been passed on from quilter to quilter, sewer to sewer, so they've been around for a long time. And I picked this tip up from, you know, somebody else.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, oh, I can't be bothered doing that, but it really does help. You just start with, so your leader is a little scrap of fabric. You sew onto that before you start sewing onto your patchwork pieces, and it just kind of chains through. And then when you finish off with a leader, and then an ender. You can cut off your leader, and that becomes the ender. Leader, ender, leader, ender. Anyway, so yeah, you'll probably see me do that a lot in the videos. And as I said, it's been a tip that's been around for a very long time.
And that's the best thing about quilting, is that it's all just community based, and
It
everything's like passed and shared. And I love that. And
share the knowledge.
yeah, we're not about gatekeeping on this channel. Like we don't like if we know something, we're telling all of you, because
That's right.
we just want everyone to have fun.
We do, and it's all about good intentions and helping you get the best out of your sewing experience.
Yep.
Yep.
100%.
And that's what gives us joy.
Yes. So tip number 8 is aligning your seams with the pin trick or glue basting.
That's right. So that's also in our accurate piecing video. So just lining up seams. So when you're doing a patchwork block, you know, you normally press your fabric towards the darkest fabric and making sure that they are alternating from row to row. So when you put them together, your seams are nesting, and we show the pin trick where the pin goes in a 1/4 inch away from the edge and through the stitching line and then back up again. And that's a really good way to help your seams line up. Someone in our Facebook group mentioned glue basting, and I use a lot of fabric glue here and there to hold things in place, and I can't believe I didn't think about that for you know, patchwork seams.
Yeah.
So I had to go and I just used my Soline glue pen. A lot of people use Roxanne's glue base. I've heard of Elmer's school glue. I haven't tried those ones, but my Soline glue pen worked perfectly. And just to set it a bit quicker, I just ironed it. Make sure you don't get any glue on the iron. And so
you could use an applique mat maybe.
Yeah, you could. That'd be a really good idea.
That's my tip. It's my contribution.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. Yeah, exactly. So the glue basting was really good.
And so number 9 is to sew with the more stabilized fabric on top.
That's right. So this is a really great tip, and it's got to do with anything that you sew, whether you're sewing a garment or patchwork or whatever. So if you were to look at a piece of fabric and across the fabric from selvage to selvage, if you had a little pull on that fabric, you'll see it's slightly flexible. Down the fabric, which is in the same direction as the selvage, have a little pull on that, you'll see it's very solid. It normally doesn't have any flexibility whatsoever. And also we know that on a 45-degree angle from the selvage, that's your stretchy grain, and so that's the bias grain. Now when you go to sew 2 pieces of fabric together, say for instance, if you had one of the more flexible grains on top, chances are that the foot is going to push it along and the feed dogs are going to, pull it through on the underneath. And so that top flexible fabric could stretch a little bit. So to stabilize that, always have a little pull on your fabric. You'll see that I do this in a lot of my videos when I'm sewing my patchwork blocks together, and I like to make sure that my more solid grain is on top, so it's going to stabilize the underneath. And like I said, if you were dressmaking something and you've ironed interfacing onto something to stabilize it, you always sew with a more stabilized piece on top where possible. It's not always possible, but where possible.
So tip number 10 is to set the seam before you press the seam.
That's right. This is one that's been around for a long time, and I did mention that I didn't think it would do anything, but before you open out a seam to press it, set it, so press it and then open it out. And if you're pressing patchwork blocks, so pieces for patchwork blocks, as I say, I always press towards the darkest fabric, and I press with a clean iron on top. When I say clean iron, I mean something that doesn't have glue on it from fusible applique, which can happen, that's right. And so you press from the top, you make sure that you don't have any creases in it. You don't iron and stretch because that's going to distort the shape, because always remember, fabric is not timber, it's a flexible, material.
Yeah.
And I just said that one grain doesn't stretch, but anyway, you know what I mean.
It's malleable. It's like, paper as well. Like you can move it around. So when you're sewing, you're being gentle, light hands, light everything.
That's exactly right.
And it's letting your tools do the work.
That's right, exactly. So not stretching it with the iron, just pressing.
Yes.
And also you really shouldn't use steam when you're doing patchwork blocks, because the steam can also distort the fabric.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I always use steam.
I thought I'd just throw that one in there.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Sometimes I use steam, but it is a little quilter's rule, not to do that.
Tip number 11 is to, when you square a block, start with the center.
That's right. Yes.
So that's actually a really good tip, because when I think of squaring a block, I just imagine putting the ruler down, just
I know.
It's a full science.
That's right. So basically, if you want a 12.5-inch block, find the center, which is 6 1/4. Put the 6 1/4 on the center, both vertically and horizontally. And then, depending if you're using a square ruler, but if you're using like a long patchwork ruler, just the trick is to always find your first straight edge and measuring from the center, of course, and then you can measure from there. So always start from the center. And also another tip we mentioned in one of our videos is if you can get those little sandpaper grips, or there is another clear grip that you can get that goes on the underside of your ruler, and just to stop it from slipping around when you're cutting it.
I mean, cutting out for quilting is an extreme sport.
It is.
Like, let's be real, that's an extreme sport. It's full on. Like, you could cut a finger. Like,
you could.
Okay, so tip number 12 is how to start and finish your quilting nicely.
That's right. So once you've got your quilt sandwich, so your top, your batting and your backing, you've held it together. As I said, I just use a few safety pins. When you start sewing, like you might start quilting, wherever you're going to start quilting, and a lot of times you look on the back and you go, oh, that's just like a messy little knot. or lump. So what you do is you bring your bobbin thread up to the top before you start sewing. So have you got a bit of B-roll on this one?
I do have some B-roll. Let's play that B-roll.
Okay, that's it. So basically, just putting your needle all the way down. On the way back up again, it will bring the bobbin thread. So just pull on that, then lift the foot, and then bring that thread around to the back and hang on to that thread, just, gently. And then when you start sewing, so what that's going to do is it means that that bobbin thread isn't going to want to kick back up into the stitching. It's going to stay nice and flat. So once you bring your thread up to the top, you then start with 6 or 7 tiny stitches. So I like to use a length of 0.4, and then I count 6 or 7. I say 6, but it always goes 7, so that's why I say 6 or 7.
It's just whatever you're feeling in the moment, really.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then you go on to your stitch length of 3. And see, those really tiny stitches, they're so hard to come undone. If you tried to unpick them, you'd be there for like an hour. So they are so secure. And I always have a little bit of a trick. I always pull on my top thread, and if that's not going anywhere, I just cut it off. Now, having said that, that's how I do things, and I do know that some people prefer to thread their threads through their batting. It's quite a traditional way to do things.
Yeah.
Just
do whatever works for you.
Do whatever works.
That's just a fun little tip if you just like to, be quick, or you can use your machine and you can set the memory function.
Yes, that's right.
Which we showed in a video. So but if you have a tip on any of these, feel free to post it in the comments below.
And does that bring us on to the next point, which is use your sewing machine
to the full potential.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So when you're watching our videos, if you see feet that I'm using, the different kind of sole plates or
bits and pieces,
that I could change. So accessories. That's right. So I could snap on a 1/4 inch foot. I could snap on an open toe foot. But not every machine does that. But have a look. You might be surprised. Your machine could do that, and you'll be like, oh wow, how good is this? Other things to think about is the needle down, needle up button. So that's really good. Every time you stop sewing, the needle finishes in the down position, and that's great so you don't lose your place. But the other thing that's really good for is that when you press it and the needle goes up, it means that the take-up lever comes all the way up. That's that little thing that you can sometimes see on the outside of your machine. These days you can't, it's concealed. But when that is in the highest position and you go to pull your work out and the threads come with it, that's when the threads slide out nicely. It's when the take-up lever is kind of like stuck halfway. Funny thing is, when you put the needle up, sometimes the take-up lever hasn't come all the way to the top, and that's when you pull it out and you have about 4 or 5 threads, and and it's not coming out nicely. So the needle up button makes sure that you can.
It's up all the way.
It's up all the way.
Yeah.
Yep. Pivot function. So that's where if you're doing applique or sewing and the needle stops in the down position and then the foot automatically lifts slightly, that's a really great function to have. So basically check your sewing machine instruction guide and just have a look for those things and see if they are available to you, because they do make sewing a lot easier.
Oh yeah, and if you've lost your guide, just Google it. Everything's on Google. Like you can find a PDF download of it, sit down, print it out, highlight for some light reading while you're having a tea. Like,
there you go. You might be surprised with some of the things that your machine can actually do.
They're amazing. Tip number 14 is to use the correct needle size.
That's right. So it's pretty simple really. If you use a fine fabric, use a fine needle. If you use a thicker fabric, use a thicker needle.
Wow.
So when you are piecing, you are just sewing through 2 kind of thin layers of cotton fabric. So you would use a size 70 needle. And if you were quilting, you have thicker layers. So therefore you would use either an 80 or a 90. So an 80/12, 90/14. So basically, higher the number, the thicker the needle. And also we have a needle chart. We'll do a blog post about this, and I will have a document that you can download, and it just tells you all about needles. So just using the correct needle for the correct fabric
makes all the difference.
It does. Yeah, will give you a really nice stitch quality. And another little thing too about needles, a lot of times if you're ever having skip stitches, that's the needle. So it either means that your needle could be blunt, or it means that your needle isn't inserted in high enough. And so it's normally a needle problem.
Yeah. And tip number 15 is to use the correct stitch length.
That's right. So when you are piecing patchwork blocks together, I like to use a size 2 because that's a small stitch length. And with piecing, you don't back tack at the beginning and end of each piece. You just chain stitch onto the next one. So a smaller stitch length is less likely to come undone. And when you're quilting, I mentioned before, I use a stitch length of 3. That's because I'm sewing through thicker layer of fabric, and a longer stitch length is going to move through better and it's going to look nicer. And also, if you did make a mistake, it's easier to unpick.
Yep. So tip number 16 is to use a Tailors awl.
So basically trusty Tailors awl, you'll see it in just about every single one of my videos. So when I'm sewing, I use it as like a second pointy finger. And
a little claw.
It's a little claw. And so sometimes if I need to ease fabric, I use it to ease fabric through. If I need to make sure that my fabric, my 2 layers are level, I can use it to pull the fabric over, just helping to feed fabric through. If you don't have a Tailors awl, look, this is a really cheap little tool. You can just use like your own picker, or if you've got a big pin, you can also use that too.
Yeah, it's such a good...
My favorite little tool.
It helps when when you get the bubbles when you're quilting.
Right, yeah.
Tip 17 is the machine applique tips about turning around corners, which we showed in a video.
That's
and
right.
so what is it, Mum?
Okay, so we have a full video on this, so you might want to check it out. So basically, I normally use 2 different stitches for applique. So one is a blanket stitch, and I just recommend if you have a blanket stitch that only moves forwards and to the left and to the right. So not one that goes backwards, forwards, left, right, backwards, forward. I mean, that's just
confusing.
It's confusing and it's hard to keep your eye on where you actually are. Mm-hmm. And then when you go to turn corners or you need to pivot to work your way around the curve, with a blanket stitch your needle only ever goes on the outside edge, so never on the inside edge, because that's going to open up the stitch and distort it. And the other stitch I like to use for applique is a small zigzag. It's not quite as closed up as a satin stitch, because I just find that it's a little bit easier to work your way around the corners. And the tip with using a small zigzag is when you sew around an outside curve and you need to stop, you stop with the needle on the outside edge. And when you have an outside corner, you stop with the needle on the outside edge. When you have an inside corner, a needle on the inside, and an inside curve, stop with a needle on the inside edge. And you also might want to see my little tip for when you do that outside corner, how instead of stopping with the needle down and then just zigzagging, I like to just move forward slightly and then continue with my zigzagging, and that stops from having the ugly lump out the corner of
the tip of something.
Yeah, the tip of something. There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really easy to remember because it's like outside curve, outside edge.
That's
inside
right.
curve, inside edge.
That's
You've got
right.
it. It's easy.
Yeah, yep.
So tip number 18 is to substitute household items that you have around for quilting templates, like we did in the strum quilt video.
That's right, we did. Yeah, okay. So things that you can use are cardboard for templates. So that's just like cereal box cardboard or like bickies, like cross skirts. That
Bickies.
kind of thing.
I don't know if people overseas say that.
Bickies.
It's biscuits.
Yep.
Cans of beans.
Oh yeah, for weights.
Yeah.
That was good, wasn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we use the tins of food, like the cans for weights.
Yeah.
You can also use old x-rays for
templates.
Tissue paper. When you need to cut a certain size, you can cut that out first of all and mark your center lines. Because it's see-through, you can then line it up and then just cut around the edge with your ruler and rotary cutter. Glue, if you don't have fabric glue, you can try using kids glue.
Yeah, as long as it's washable, non-toxic and acid-free.
That's exactly right, but always test it first.
Another good one is painter's tape or masking tape for doing
quilting lines.
Lines, yeah.
That's exactly right. And that's one that's been around for years. So some of these tips we're giving, as we said, have been around for years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And tip number 19 is have fun and enjoy.
Enjoy the process. That's exactly right.
And a lot of people said that after they made their first quilt. They were like, just slow down. Don't be too hard on yourself.
In one of my videos, I did mention that I don't sew fast. I really do take my time, and I'm sewing and making sure that everything is nice and accurate. I'm pinning, and I do that because we had a laugh before, because when we make our videos, Alora's behind me with the camera, and I don't want to make any
one
mistakes.
shot. We got one shot.
That's exactly right. So it's like I don't want to make a mistake, so I have to unpick it. But no, just enjoy the process. Look, whenever I used to sew, and I think this happens to everybody because we lead such busy lives. So when you sit down to sew, and this is your time, but you don't have a lot of time, so you're sewing really fast so that you can get things done. But I think at the end of the day, just enjoy the process. And, and if you make any little mistakes and it's not absolutely perfect, who
cares? You're not a robot.
That's right.
It's handmade.
It's handmade with love.
I want to see mistakes.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? That's the best thing about this course is people are posting their photos being like, hey, it's not perfect and it's unique to you. It's your own thing. And every single stitch or fabric or whatever houses a memory of that moment.
Certainly
right?
does,
Like whenever I look at the Twilight Dreaming quilt that we made over there, we'll do some B-roll, that we made, last year. Like everything about it, like there's fabric in there that I got when I used to work in a sewing store when I was 19. And I think back to that.
I think back to the fun that we had.
I guess to summarize on that point, just enjoy it, enjoy the process, don't be too hard on yourself, throw perfectionism out the window.
Or
kick it out the door. You don't need it. We have to be perfect in every other facet of our lives.
Right.
Like, perfect mums, perfect grandmas.
I am the perfect mum.
You are pretty perfect. But sewing is the one place where you can come and be you and uniquely you
That's right.
So just keep going.
Exactly.
So tip number 20, the final tip of this video
is, if you're going to make a quilt-as-you-go quilt, plan the kind of technique that you're going to use, because all of the different techniques have different guidelines that you need to work between so that you can actually achieve the quilt-as-you-go result. So by planning, it will make the process a whole lot smoother.
So that brings us to the end of our top tips video. We hope you enjoyed it.
We enjoyed making it for you.
And if you liked it,
share it to a friend.
Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say there, but you know what I mean. Please subscribe, please share it to a friend.
That's right.
Yeah.
And let us know what your top tips are in the comments. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.